Today, IBM is one of the most respected technology companies in the world, worth $130 billion. It operates in more than 170 countries. Governments trust it. Universities trust it. The financial system of the modern world runs, in part, on infrastructure that IBM built. But there is a chapter in IBM's history that the company has never fully addressed. A chapter that required a 500-page book written by an investigative journalist who spent years in archives across 3 continents to bring into public view. A chapter the company did everything in its power to keep buried. Because IBM did not merely exist during the worst atrocity in modern history. IBM did not simply operate in a country where atrocities were being committed. IBM provided the technological infrastructure that made those atrocities systematic, that made them efficient, that made them, in a word that should never have to be applied to the murder of human beings, organized. This is the story of IBM and the Holocaust. And it begins, as so many dark stories do, not with evil, but with ambition. Herman Hollerith was born in 1860 in Buffalo, New York, to German immigrant parents. He was a statistician, a mathematician, a man who saw in numbers a kind of beauty that most people could not access. He worked for the United States Census Bureau in the 1880s and became obsessed with a problem that the census faced. The American population was growing so fast that by the time the Bureau finished counting the data from one census, it was nearly time to start the next one. The 1880 census had taken 8 years to tabulate. The 1890 census, it was projected, would take longer than 10. Hollerith invented a solution. He created a system of punch cards, small pieces of paper with holes punched in specific positions to represent data, and a mechanical tabulating machine that could read those holes and count them at extraordinary speed. Each card could represent a person. Each hole could represent a characteristic: age, gender, occupation, country of origin. The machine could process hundreds of cards per minute and sort them, count them, and calculate across categories that would have taken human clerks years to work through manually. The 1890 United States Census was tabulated using Hollerith's machines. The process took 2.5 years, instead of the projected 10. The United States government was astonished. Hollerith became famous. In 1896, Herman Hollerith founded the Tabulating Machine Company to commercialize his invention. In 1911, that company merged with 3 others, and in 1924, under the leadership of a man named Thomas J. Watson, the company was renamed International Business Machines, IBM. Thomas Watson was not a scientist or an inventor. He was a salesman, a brilliant, relentless, visionary salesman who understood something that many technology pioneers failed to grasp: that the most powerful invention in the world was useless unless someone could convince powerful institutions to buy it. Watson spent his career doing exactly that. He sold IBM's machines to banks, to insurance companies, to railroads, to governments. He built IBM from a mid-sized tabulating company into one of the most powerful corporations in America. By the time Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January 1933, IBM was already operating a subsidiary in Germany. It was called Die Hamag, the Deutsche Hollerith Maschinengesellschaft. IBM owned 90% of Die Hamag's shares. Watson was personally aware of its operations, and Die Hamag was about to receive a contract that would transform IBM's role in Germany from a mundane office supplier into something far more consequential. In 1933, the new Nazi government of Germany announced a national census. On the surface, this was an ordinary administrative exercise. Governments conduct censuses. They count their populations. They collect demographic data. There is nothing unusual about this. But this census was not ordinary. The Nazi government needed information that no previous German census had sought with any particular urgency. They needed to know, with precision and at scale, how many Jews lived in Germany, where they lived, what they did for work, whether they had Jewish grandparents, whether they were married to non-Jews. The census was not a count of citizens. It was a targeting exercise, and to execute it at the speed and scale that the Nazi bureaucracy required, they needed a technology partner. DHOMIG provided that partnership. IBM's punch card machines were deployed across Germany to process the data from the 1933 census. Every German citizen filled out a form. That form was translated into a punch card. The punch card was fed into a Hollerith machine, and the machine sorted the population with an efficiency that hand calculation could never have matched. Within months, the Nazi government had a precise statistical portrait of every Jewish person in Germany. Their names, their addresses, their occupations, their religious background, their family connections. The census results were then used to implement the first major anti-Jewish legislation of the Nazi state, the Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service, which removed Jews from government employment. The information was precise enough to identify and terminate specific individuals. That precision came from the Hollerith machines. That precision came from IBM. Thomas Watson was not an ignorant man. He was not a naive executive who had handed his technology to a foreign government without understanding how it would be used. He was deeply invested in the German market. He visited Germany personally. He had relationships with the senior figures of German industry and government. And in 1937, those relationships led to a ceremony that should have ended Watson's career and IBM's reputation in a single afternoon. On June 28, 1937, in Berlin, Adolf Hitler awarded Thomas J. Watson, the chief executive of IBM, the Merit Cross of the German Eagle with Star. This was one of the highest honors the Nazi regime could bestow on a foreign national. It was given in recognition of Watson's contribution to German economic recovery. Watson accepted the medal. He wore it. He did not return it until 1940. 3 years later, after Germany invaded France, and it became commercially inconvenient to be seen as sympathetic to the Nazi regime, he returned it with a letter that was diplomatic in its careful avoidance of anything resembling a clear moral statement. He did not return the money IBM had made from Germany. He did not terminate DHOMIG's contracts. He did not withdraw IBM's machines from German government operations. He returned a piece of metal and continued doing business. By 1939, when Germany invaded Poland and the Second World War began, IBM's machines were woven into the administrative fabric of the Nazi state at every level. But what followed over the next 6 years would take the role of IBM's technology far beyond census administration. It would take it into the camps. The concentration camp system that the Nazi regime built across Germany and occupied Europe required above all else logistics. Managing hundreds of thousands of prisoners across dozens of facilities spread across a continent required data. Who was where, what they were assigned to do, whether they were alive or dead, how they had died, what their prisoner category was. The Nazi bureaucracy was, among its many other characteristics, obsessively organized, and IBM's punch card technology was the organizational tool that made the management of that bureaucracy possible at scale. Each prisoner who entered the camp system was assigned a number. That number corresponded to a punch card. The punch card encoded information in a system of columns and holes that could be read by the Hollerith machines and sorted, counted, and tabulated in combination with the cards of other prisoners across the entire system. Column 3 recorded the type of prisoner. Code 8 meant Jewish. Column 34 recorded the cause of death. Code 6 meant the cause of death was that the prisoner had been burned. The combination of codes on a prisoner's card told a story that no individual reading a single card could easily decode, but which the machines, sorting and counting across thousands of cards at once, assembled into a systematic picture of industrial death. Auschwitz used Hollerith machines. Buchenwald used Hollerith machines. Dachau used Hollerith machines. Across the network of camps that stretched from France to Poland to the occupied Soviet Union, IBM's technology was present, not as a peripheral tool, not as a marginal convenience, as a core component of the administrative infrastructure that allowed the Nazi state to process, track, and ultimately murder 6 million Jewish people and millions of others, with the organized efficiency of a modern industrial enterprise. The evidence for this is not speculative. It is not the work of conspiracy theorists. It is the product of years of archival research conducted by an American journalist named Edwin Black, who spent years working through records and archives in Germany, Poland, Switzerland, France, and the United States. In 2001, Black published a book called IBM and the Holocaust. It ran to 500 pages. It was supported by more than 50,000 documents. The documents showed that IBM's New York headquarters maintained regular contact with Die Heimat throughout the war years. They showed that IBM leased its machines to German clients rather than selling them, a business practice that required regular servicing, which meant IBM personnel maintained a presence in Germany throughout the war. They showed that Watson and his executives were aware of the German operations and continued to receive financial information about them. IBM's response to Black's book was to decline to comment publicly. The company did not commission an independent historical study. It did not issue a formal apology. It simply waited for the conversation to move on. And the conversation, largely, moved on. Watson received the Medal for Merit from President Truman in 1947, just 2 years after the end of the war. The citation praised his contributions to American enterprise. There was no mention of Die Heimat, no mention of the census machines, no mention of the concentration camp tabulation systems, no mention of the medal he had accepted from Adolf Hitler. He was decorated by the Nazi regime and decorated by the American government, within a decade of each other. Watson died in 1956. IBM continued to grow. By the 1960s, it was the dominant technology company in the world. By the 1990s, its revenues exceeded $60 billion. The company that had helped the Nazi state organize its census, track its prisoners, and administer its death camps, had become one of the most powerful corporate entities in human history. Today, IBM generates revenues of approximately $60 billion annually. Its cloud computing division, its artificial intelligence research, its quantum computing program, all represent the cutting edge of a technology industry that IBM helped create. The company that ran the punch card systems that tracked Jewish prisoners in Auschwitz is now building the artificial intelligence systems that will track, analyze, and make decisions about populations in ways that previous generations could not have imagined. That parallel is not accidental, and it is not comfortable. The fundamental capability that made IBM's machines dangerous in the hands of the Nazi state, the ability to take information about a large population, sort it into categories, and use those categories to make decisions about individuals at scale, is precisely the capability that modern data technology has expanded to a degree that Hollerith could not have conceived. The punch card held 80 columns of data. The modern database holds essentially unlimited columns. The Hollerith machine processed hundreds of cards per minute. The modern server processes billions of records per second. Herman Hollerith, the man who invented the punch card, died in 1929. He never saw what his invention would be used for. Thomas Watson, the man who ran IBM through the years of the Nazi regime, the man who accepted the medal, who maintained the German operations, who returned a piece of metal but not the money, died in 1956, and was mourned as one of the great figures of American business. Edwin Black, the journalist who spent years reconstructing what IBM had done, faced threats and legal pressure before his book was published. When it was finally published in 2001, it became a New York Times bestseller. IBM declined to comment. The machines that processed the punch cards in Auschwitz and Buchenwald and Dachau are not in IBM's corporate museum. They are not referenced in IBM's official history. The company that produced them has spent more than 70 years not talking about what they were used for. 6 million people. That is the story of IBM and the Holocaust. That is the technology that counted the victims. And that is the company that built it, profited from it, and has never, in any official capacity, apologized for it. That is the story you were never meant to look up.